its partners worldwide in achieving its objectives in the field of international cooperation for sustainable development. And I am delighted to actually call upon my CEO, Ingrid Hoven, the board member of GIZ, to give us the welcoming note and to set the scene of this exciting panel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues. The COP is entering into its decisive phase. And I think, therefore, it's very appropriate that we here in this room are going to deal with one of the possibly most important issues that we still have to address also in the forthcoming hours until this COP is being finalized. But due to the fact that a lot is still at stake, and at stake is whether this COP is not only going to deliver on many good issues such as health, resilience, and will be a bold COP. This is still to be decided depending on what kind of text comes out, and even if it could be historic finally, depending on what can be achieved in the next 24 hours. But due to this fact that the negotiations are still underway, some of our friends and co-organizing partners had simply to skip out. And additionally, of course, press conferences are taking place, among them of our foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, and she is the lead EU negotiator on mitigation issues, and you can imagine that therefore many German friends and European friends are very busy this afternoon. I think we had a very good start, and let me say, because sometimes we get so much absorbed by the daily business, that I think this COP had an amazing start, and it has to do with the whole issue of building resilience. It's about the Loss and Damage Fund. I mean, those of you that have been following the climate process for many years, and those of you that are actually either from those countries mostly affected by climate change, partnering with those countries to protect them more forcefully from the impact of climate change and extreme weather events, know how decisive such additional engagement is by the international community. And for many years, there was a big debate whether this can be done. And the announcement at the very early stage of this COP, and then the mobilization of additional $700 million US. I hope that is not the last number, but perhaps more money can be mobilized in the short term, is a very important signal. And even more so that this time, the group of contributors is actually different from the traditional pattern that we had so far when it came to replenishments and capitalizations of funds, because it sends out a signal that those that have more economic potential to show solidarity with those that are most affected by climate change, and those that are the main polluters with respect to CO2 emission should actually bear the burden of mobilizing funding and capital for those that are most affected by climate change. So the way this fund has been established and the first mobilization has taken place also sends a strong signal, I think, to the broader climate finance agenda. Today, of course, we deal with the adaptation agenda at large. We all know the more we do on the mitigation side, the less activity has to happen on the adaptation side. This was a slogan that I've heard at the very beginning, 20 years ago, actually, when still people thought that if we concentrate forcefully on the mitigation side, that may be sufficient We have to recognize nowadays climate change is happening, has a huge impact on the planet and on people, and therefore we have to create more bold action in this field as well. Of course, adaptation also means that we invest in resilience, that we try to invest in preventive measures. And the more we do on the adaptation side, the less has to happen on the loss and damage side. This is also therefore a very wise investment if we start early on to make people, communities, countries more resilient against the impact of climate change. Adaptation in German development cooperation and at GIZ at large actually plays, since many, many years, a very important role. 50% of our portfolio is in the adaptation field. And it starts from actually mainstreaming climate issues into our activities in the agriculture sector. It goes into the water sector, where we try really to deal with the impact of climate change, either when it comes to droughts, water scarcity, or floods. And it goes even beyond that to new planning, for instance, in the urban area, where you're going to see that a lot of infrastructure is going to be built newly or rehabilitated, and where actually we have to do this in a way that we take into consideration the impact of climate change. And we are very proud that up to now, we could support 68 countries in elaborating their national adaptation plans. I think this is a very good start. We see this what has happened in the past, but I would like to share with you 4 observations. Yeah, there are 4 observations. What still needs to be done more in the future? And from our panel, we have a high-level panel and experts on the panel, and these are our partners actually that are being mentioned here. We will learn how this can be put into practice, the new challenges that still lie ahead of us. The first one is about how should national adaptation plans be elaborated in order to make them more lasting, to make them more sustainable, to make them more successful. And what we have learned so far in our first attempts to support countries in these endeavors is that we have to take a multi-sectoral and a multi-stakeholder approach. Adaptation means this is a cross-cutting issue, and it cuts across all sectors. It needs a multi-level approach. So by designing a NAP, we have to bring different institutions to the table. The government, the national level, cities, local communities, but also local and the civil society and the private sector, because in some areas also the private sector has a big role to play. Additionally, we should make sure that NAPs are not only attached to one ministry, infrastructure, agriculture, but it's really a multi-sectoral effort. And that is easier said than done. I see a lot of nodding in this field, and we all have our own experience in Germany, that unless you create the right dialogue platforms for engagement, you run the risk that a NAP only represents part of the areas that should be covered. Secondly, in the past, I think we couldn't actually perhaps elaborate NAPs that take into account the medium and longer term climate impact. Nowadays, we have actually elaborated and designed new toolkits, and among them, and the very important ones, are risk assessment. We need climate risk analysis in order to calculate in advance how a climate change will actually affect population and infrastructure. And we need this type of information not only at the aggregate national level, but also at the subnational level, at the city level. Only then we can really make sure that the decision taken at the operational level represent what we need to do. So climate risk assessments are now, for me, a state-of-the-art underlying tool that we need to apply in order to make NAPs more evidence-based and more actually designed towards the most important risk. The need for a more evidence-based decision-making is also necessary because resources to deal with the adaptation needs are not abundant. And therefore, it's important that we take the right investment decision. What would pay off the most? What would provide the most in protection for the money that we can invest? And risk assessment gives us some kind of guideline in this respect. Thirdly, there is no one-size-fits-all approach in NAPs. Although we may have standardized tools at hand, like risk assessments and so far, still we have to make sure that we depart from country-specific needs. And additionally, we should also take into consideration what kind of institutional capacities are needed in order not only to elaborate a NAP, design a NAP, but also to implement it. I come from another side event this morning where actually a Brazilian colleague explained how much of an investment is needed in Brazil in order to put local governments in a position really to implement a new and more ambitious climate agenda. And they see a big divide between the South and the North, and they have said, we are going to make climate capacity building mandatory for every ministry. I found this wonderful, and I was considering whether I should bring this back to my own home country. Because here and there might be also need to, to elevate the climate literacy. And finally, my final point, my dear colleagues. We have scarce resources, we have scarce capacities in government, in municipalities, in local governments, in communities. The less that we need are a duplication of processes and efforts and too many papers. What is now needed is more action. What does this mean in practice? We have NAPs, we have NDCs, we have long-term strategies. But do they speak to each other sufficiently? That's the point. Do they build upon each other? Question mark. I think that we all have learned, those that have been here for many years in the climate process, we need the long-term perspective. We have to ask ourselves, how does a transformation look like in 2030 and 2040? What does it require? Therefore, we need the long-term strategies really to make sure that we get to net zero and build up continuously the resilience that is needed in countries. And at the same time, reshape, transform the economy in a way that we create additionally big opportunities for growing, in some continents, a growing and very young generation. So this is the vision. So we need long-term perspectives, but we need also concrete plans, the national determined contributions, and most of them already contain in some way or another adaptation elements. That's good so. But the question is, of course, NAPs can be more informed, can be more detailed, but the way we are actually creating synergies among these different work streams is quite important. So I think what I would like to plea for is first that we actually make sure as international cooperation partners, civil society and governments that we avoid duplication of efforts, that we try as much as possible to capitalize on synergies, and that we try also, and thirdly, that we make sure that in our own recommendations and advice, that we make sure that we align those three work streams and really make sure that we, by doing so, also open up space for mobilizing more finance. Our assumption is the more those three work streams, especially the NDCs and the NAPs, speak to each other and are well aligned, the bigger the chance is going to be to mobilize more funding for this very crucial area, adaptation. These are my thoughts to kick off this very exciting afternoon session and side event. I thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to a very good and frank discussion among colleagues and friends and partners here in Dubai. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ingrid, for this welcoming note and setting the scene for this very important topic of planning, but also thinking about implementation. But before we move on to our first panel, since we are approaching the last days of the COP and we can see people are getting tired, we will have an energizer by Justin Rowlett, a climate editor at BBC, to keep the energy high at this event. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping to spend more time here, but as you know, the discussions have really heated up here, and we're getting towards the kind of final negotiations. As you know, the text has gone to the countries, the new text, and we'll find out what the range of options are. And obviously now, our job is to kind of try and follow these negotiations. And I thought you might be interested to know on the subject of adaptation, how central that issue is to many of the countries here. So we've literally, Iraq is a few buildings down, and we've just come from a conversation with the Environment Minister of Iraq, who's one of the key blocking countries. Anyone who watched the Majlis will have seen some really kind of powerful rhetoric from him. And he's very angry with the rest of the world. He says, you say you ought to make these changes to your society, and you promise that you're going to help me adapt my country and provide alternatives in terms of clean energy, but I don't see the money. And it's not my responsibility. The developing countries caused this problem, 300 years of your industrial revolution. We're the victims of this. He says, my rivers are running dry, the Tigris and the Euphrates are running dry, and he wants action. And that's how central. So his demand for adaptation in his economy is plugging directly into the negotiations here. And if there is a block, and Saudi Arabia says the same thing, and it's actually articulating a view that many, many developing countries have, and they're saying without the package that includes finance and adaptation, they're not willing to make the compromises implied in the language that the world wants to see. And it's very easy for us in developing countries to say, well, look, it has to happen. You can only solve it together. He says, look, I'm 0.4% of world emissions, and you're asking me to solve this problem? So that's the debate we're up against. And without support at this level, support to change countries' economies in tangible ways that they can recognize and take to their people and say, look, these compromises are worth it, we're going to struggle to get this kind of deal over. I don't think it's over yet. I think we could. There may be a compromise on the table in the form of words, maybe down, maybe a just transition or some other kind of fudge. But we won't get the strong language which recognizes what the world really needs to do without the kind of things that you're discussing here right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's keep the energy high. And I want to introduce the first panel on transformation and scaling up adaptation planning. So we would like to find out from our fantastic international panelists, what are the key ingredients for successful NAP planning processes. So I'm happy to call up on Maria Dombro, the representative from UCCRN Columbia University. Please join us on the panel. Mrs. Aria St. Louis, head of the Environment Division from the Ministry of Climate Resilience and Renewable Energy in Grenada. Please join us on the panel. Mr. Hong Patterson, Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at GCF. Welcome. Mr. Jochen Renger, Director for Climate Change, Rural Development and Infrastructure Division in GIZ. And Mrs. Diana Rieken from the UTGGGI University of Twente, from the NAP's Best Practice Initiatives. And actually, I would like you to come directly to the podium to give us the first introduction in this topic of the first panel. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome from me too. My name is Diana Rekin. I am from the University of Twente. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm here presenting a project that we are doing on behalf, or that we are doing together with the Global Green Growth Institute. I was given 5 minutes, that's why I will be short. We started from the point that now the countries are called to develop or implement or improve their NDCs. And that is not easy because there is not even a scientific agreed form of how you can assess adaptation. But we had some lessons from plan evaluation on the urban level and a publication that I published with colleagues earlier the year. So then we thought, don't we want to do that, or can we do that for the national level as well? And that's why we set off to identify best practices in NDCs for others to learn. We want to develop guidelines to develop good quality, robust and implementable NDCs. And we want the output to feed into the global stocktake. On the right-hand side here, you see our framework. It consists of 7 categories that go along what others would call the decision cycle or the planning cycle, enriched by 56 elements under those 7 categories and 44 sub-elements. Each have a protocol so that across the many languages that we have, all evaluators are on that same page when they code. We are looking at goals and have a number of questions below that. Are there quantitative goals? Are they time-bound? Things like that. On participation, fact-based, like is there risk assessment and impact assessment, vulnerability assessment, things like that. Policy and measures. Then what do we know about implementation? Are there responsibilities, timelines for implementation specified? What do we learn about M&E in the NAP? And what is specified about finance? And in a really quick, oops, I am sorry. Yeah, I read it aloud on my computer, but apparently you could not follow. So just a quick seconds. On the right-hand side, you have the framework. Yeah? And now I present you a quick overview of what we've seen to date. We are, that's not the final product, so we have now published a draft. You see that the components, goals, fact-based, policy, and implementation are well represented. So 75% for the component fact-based is answered in the NAP, so we find information on that. But it also means that there are still 25% more aspects that could be detailed out in the NAPs that we believe is a good guideline that would lead to better implementation, or let's say to a more profound and more successful implementation. And it goes to goals. 70% of our indicators are touched upon. Policy 74, implementation 69. With regard to participation, only 57% of those indicators that we find important for a successful NAP, or for, let's say, a NAP that has high implementation rates. And the same is for monitoring and evaluation. There is also some room for detailing out the NAPs more. And when we see finance here, 38%. So the countries really apparently need more help and guidance and support with the finance aspect. Then we come to good practices. So for the goals, we would say that it is a guideline to develop smart objectives for adaptation, but also for implementation, and that needs to be specific to the country's climate change context. In Peru, we have a very good example. Here, Peru integrates goals into gender and other social policies, sets quantitative goals by highlighting percentages of climate change actions implemented per objectives. When it comes to implementation, we would advise that prioritizing adaptation actions is a good way forward. Define implementation timelines and institutional frameworks that can support that. Design responsible parties or designate responsible parties and identify potential barriers. We have a number of very good examples from Timor-Leste that assign specific lead agencies for actions, from Bangladesh that have a very good example for vertical integration, and from Cabo Verde, who had identified barriers to the implementation. So all these are examples that other countries can learn from and that other countries can get inspiration from. Then when it comes to good practices about participation, we would advise that participation is valuable throughout the process and best before the goal setting starts. Include vulnerable groups, women and youth. We have examples here from Fiji. They have a NAP steering committee to include relevant technical expertise, responses to the needs of all stakeholders. And we have South Africa that particularly mentions youth representatives and addresses the needs of infants and child-headed families and households. And with regard to MNE, we would give the advice that try to make time-specific indicators include vulnerable populations, but also vulnerable industries in the MNE process. We have a very good example here from Togo, which has a very robust MNE system that outlines targets to monitor the implementation, assigns responsibility across all different sectors, and also ministerial, local, and ministerial local levels. And finally, when it comes to finance, we would advise recognize and identify financial gaps and highlight the cost of inaction or delayed action next to the cost of actions. Here we have also very good examples. For instance, Burkina Faso, they predict a GDP loss of the mentioned amount of US dollars if no action is taken. And the relatively low cost of action is a very compelling argument to act. We see Armenia's financing framework and implementation plan for climate change adaptation that's tailored to involve the private sector, which is also very innovative. And Papua New Guinea involves creating the Climate Resilient and Green Growth Trust Fund as one channel to revenue sources and to mobilize finance. So again, I want to underline that these are good examples that we think other countries can learn from, that they can look up and see whether that applies to their own context. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diana. Please join us on the panel. And I actually have a direct follow-up question. So to summarize this review, what struck you the most? What was the most surprising finding?
A number of things. Thank you very much for the question.
Only one, please.
Only one. That we found so many countries being clear on their goals. This is actually quite positive, in particular when we compare it to the local level adaptation plans, where local levels and cities are usually much more general and unclear where they want to head towards. So that was a very positive aspect. So apparently the countries are clear what their impacts and risks are, and then where they want to head for. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Following up on this, I would like to ask Aria from Granada. So we have heard the goals are clear, but what are actually the key ingredients for a successful NAP planning process from the perspective of your country?
So thank you so very much, Madam Moderator, and good afternoon to all. I just at the outset want to thank GIZ, the NAP Global Network, BBC Media Action, the University of Twente. Thank you so very much for that excellent presentation. the Global Green Growth Institute, and of course Columbia University. This is such a juicy and interesting question, but in helping to prepare Minister, and again, I deeply apologize because we have our budget cycle every year happening around this time. It has meant that Minister was not able to attend, and certainly up until this morning, and she's presenting in a few minutes from now, but again, she was checking in to see how things were progressing. So certainly I know that she had been looking very much forward to being here. But I would suggest there were a few key ingredients from the context of Grenada. When you think at the policy and legislative stage, excuse me, the fact that we had enshrined this into our Financial Management Act, asking specifically, so for Grenada, which is unusual in the region, we both have the National Climate Change Committee, which is an important coordination mechanism, enshrined in our Financial Act, as well as the need for climate risk screenings to be done for all of our capital projects. So when you think at the big picture for policy and legislation, I think that that was really important. At the action level, and very much a part of the planning process, we started off by engaging at the highest level. So engaging our ministers, letting them know we were going to be starting this kind of process. And with their endorsement, they were then sensitized and aware. So, and Grenada, I encourage you all to visit, but in Grenada, even though it's a small tri-island state, people are very vocal about their rights. They have no problem in speaking about what are the issues and what things they think will work for them. So it was really important to make sure that we were inclusive, and right from the start, just as indicated by my wonderful colleague, long before the goal setting, we started with a very participatory approach. A blank page and a pen saying, you have some idea now about what the impacts are. What do you think would be prioritized? How is this impacting your livelihood? And therefore, what actions do you see as being necessary? This was, again, very much a stepwise process working along with them. Our process for development of our NAP took 2 years, in fact. But having done that, I felt like if you landed, you would be able to speak to the people at the airport. They would speak to you from that context, what kinds of actions they knew they would be responsible for, having been sensitized to the impacts of climate change, understood how it was going to affect their work environment, and then seeing how their role could be enhanced and what kinds of activities they wanted. So having gone through that robust process and touch base from time to time through our ministers with cabinet, towards the end it was really easy. And we did sort of a more, I want to say dirty costing. But the fact that we had, one, in parallel, enshrined this into government's institutional arrangements, because we felt like that enabling environment needed to be created by government. We did that as part of the initial sensitizing of what is climate change. And you hear them talking, climate change is real. Because initially, as you know, there was a lot of debate, there was a lot of muddying of the waters, and people were not sure about that. And then bit by bit, we were able to work along with those. For example, there was an unusual, permit me just 3 seconds more. There was another part was our ministry has a small fund that we use to enable environment action, and we focused it on climate resilient action. And one of the things that most impressed me was a project concept and proposal that came in from a theater group. And they actually took it to the tri-island state, and they built the capacity of local community to understand climate impacts from their perspective. So we had people in the Ramsar site speaking about how climate was going to impact the loggerhead turtles and their ecotourism opportunities. This is the slow onset events. We had those who are accustomed to working as vendors on beaches, and so talking about the sea level rise. So this was one of the less usual ways, through using theater, to have those in the community start to internalize and understand in a different way how climate was going to impact them. And this then resulted in them having more robust conversations about how they were going to become more resilient, how they were going to diversify their livelihoods. That, along with, in parallel, the government working to create things like the update of our Financial Management Act to say that the National Climate Change Committee had an important role for coordination of our capital projects, and then all projects must be screened, meant that, and I'm a public servant, but I can tell you that, there's a lot of processes that we have to go through, and so making sure that all within government were aware of this and that this was enshrined in law was really important as part of the process, in addition to sensitizing. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for the invitation to Grenada. It's a very nice island and country. I have been there, and it's a very engaged government on sustainable development. And as you have just talked about, start at the high level with planning and make it inclusive. So I would like to know from Jochen, how can development actors like GIZ facilitate an inclusive process that leads to ambitious and high quality NAPs?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonja. Is the mic working? Yeah, mic is working. Thank you very much, Sonja. You may have realized that this is a very gender unbalanced panel here, right? But I'm fine with it, and it's excellent as a matter of fact. Yeah. So please clap for this panel. Thank you so much. Well. Yeah, it's not the usual case, when you go on panels on the COP. Yeah, so it's really it makes my day, so to speak. Yeah. Anyway, not in order to lose more time, Sonja. Apologies for that. The question you have raised is exactly the right question because it's all about taking action now. And I see our role as GIZ and also the role of other development agencies very much in supporting our partner countries, in the entire process of the NAPs, starting from the very planning phase through the implementation via the monitoring the results, but also, adjusting and, changing anything of results. We might have to start even earlier just to think jointly about, how to shape, how to structure the process, because it has to be an inclusive planning process. So this is where we can, step in. Regarding the planning phase and preparing for the NAP, to my understanding or our understanding, it's very much necessary that we base this planning on empirical evidence and true data and robust information. NAPs are not about a wild guess. You need to have a scientific foundation. And this includes also, by the way, identifying, what has worked so far, why and how, and what not. We have to, build the planning process also on lessons learned. Mrs. Hoven at the keynote speech indicated the importance of, a climate risk analysis. To really calculate in advance how the climate will, change and how this will affect the population, how this will affect economic development, how this will affect, infrastructure and infrastructure development, and certainly how it will affect nature and the environment. So, sound risk management analysis are really the basis for, identifying any kind of adaptation options. And they are really essential when it comes to our partner countries. This risk analysis take a little while, but it's good to invest at an early stage so that we really find the right track and that we move ourselves into a position to find the right option. As far as GIZ is concerned, together with our partners, we have recently, released our so-called climate risk source book that delivers a conceptual framework for a comprehensive climate risk assessment, together with, modular instructions on how it can be conducted. GIZ is an implementing agency. We are practitioners, and so we are very happy to have this, climate risk source book at hand, so we can actually use this. From experiences, how many hours do I have still? 1 minute? 1 minute, okay. Final thing, because, NAP planning is not going to be an easy process. It's going to be a bumpy flight, and we have to be very clear about that. That's all fine. And we know from, some NAP development processes that government often try to, they base their NAP not on sufficient scientific evidence, and the NAPs are somehow a kind of wish list, which is very sad and unfortunate, and we have to really keep an eye on that we do not end up with a wish list that is highly political, and when the next government comes, then we have to start the process again. So this is very, very much important to actually keep an eye on that. And as I said in the beginning, another lesson learned is also clearly it's all about a multi-stakeholder process. It's about inclusion from the very national level, from the very local level. We can see a lot of partner countries having extremely good experiences with this kind of multi-level, multi-stakeholder processes. And when it comes to any kind of just transition, stakeholder inclusion is a must anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jochen. And Maria, representing the Columbia University, we have just heard 2 times from Jochen that the planning of NAPs should also be based on true figures, true data. So it would be interesting to see from the scientific research perspective, what are the key ingredients for more ambitious and high quality NAPs? The floor is yours.
So first I'd like to thank Nika, Sandra, GIZ, and the rest of the partners for the opportunity to be here on this panel and help represent a younger generation of thinkers. Also as an adaptation, impact, and risk researcher at Columbia University's Climate School, as well as the global coordinator of the Urban Climate Change Research Network, I see a lot of linkages, interlinkages and interdependencies between NAPs and events. If we are to reduce disaster-related risk, DRR, we must better incorporate these into NAPs and NAP processes. Otherwise, there will be forgotten groups of vulnerable people, of humans, and human needs at not just national scales, but also subnational scales and local scales. So with that, I suggest that we start thinking beyond the traditional geographic boundaries. Category 5 hurricanes will not respect the spatial boundaries. Neither will flooding or sea level rise or heavy precipitation downpour events. And hurricanes as well present national financial concerns. So for example, New York experienced we call it Superstorm Sandy in 2012, and the New York Stock Exchange was closed for 2 days. It's a historic event. At this point, I'd like to highlight the Urban Climate Change Research Network's 3rd assessment report on climate change in cities, which is due to come out in 2024 and 2025. Specifically, I want to highlight a special report on urban climate science here, which is developing NASA-informed NASA data sets on projections, compound risk analyses. Specifically, we're starting our compound risk analysis with heat and humidity. Yes, this is a local level effort, right? But cities are these first responders to extreme events. and a variety of them, a matter of fact. My second point is on monitoring and evaluation. I believe that adaptation effectiveness should be more incorporated into the process, as well as scientific storytelling. I think there's value in integrating new ways of thinking into these NAPS processes, things that are more accessible, especially if we are putting forth that participatory engagement is a key factor in the NAP process. UCERN has a case study model which could potentially be useful to feed into monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We have benchmarked case studies which track the science and the adaptation over time. For example, we have case studies on sea level rise in New York, which is a sea level rise acceleration hotspot because of the geodynamics of the ground and the topography. But we have benchmarked case studies starting from 2011 that go on to modern day, and our sea level rise expert based out of Columbia, Vivian Gornitz, she's tracked the sea level rise change over time, and sure, this is a 10-year time frame, but it's a start, right? But I think that's what we're all after here, getting a good head start. So science at the national level, on a third note, science at the national level must be sound, and I would also suggest innovation here. Clear strategies for vertical integration should be key partner groups. They should include key partner groups for tackling specific complex issues. The more specific we get about planning as well as implementation, which will potentially bring us to our second panel in the near future, the better off we're going to be. Lastly, I'd like to mention the third assessment report on climate change in cities once more, which offers both science and policy as well as their integration on spatial and temporal scales. We have workshops, we call them urban design climate workshops, and they meet you where you are. We have local experts that have on the ground efforts, and with that I will close my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I just want to highlight that this morning we met a representative from Brasilia, from state level, and the first thing he asked us was, how can we build capacity and knowledge to build data for our planning processes? And I think it's a very important topic, and you just highlighted on that. Thank you very much. I want to move on to an organization which is more on the donor funding side, and I would like to find out from you, Hong, what is GCF's strategy in supporting the NEP processes and adaptation more broadly?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I see a couple of friendly faces here, and I have to just congratulate everyone for surviving the last 2 weeks and still standing strong for this event. So thank you for that, and it's great to be seated next to our partner GIZ, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we do. So if I start with just a little bit of adaptation more broadly and what we do at the GCF, and then specifically for NAPS planning. We are established under sorry. We are established under the Paris Agreement to really have a 50-50 mitigation adaptation balance in our portfolio, and we are largely there, just slightly ahead on the adaptation side. Actually, our portfolio stands at $13.5 billion, so approximately half of that is supporting adaptation projects. Of that, 60%, or actually 2/3, so over 60% of our projects are focused on LDCs, SIDS, and African states. And so you can imagine that that is not an insignificant amount. We are, by certain studies, we probably are the biggest contributor for SIDS since 2015 in terms of programming. I guess, you know, I think the programming side, so that's on the programming side, but what we also do is that we are the largest capacity building organization with sitting at nearly $600 million in capacity building programming. And one of the things that we have realized is that it takes more than just the GCF. It really does take a village to help with this issue. And so when we look at the readiness programming, we do support NAPS programming with our readiness funding. So we thus far have supported 105 programs to help with NAPS planning. So that's 105, I should say, readiness grants for NAPS planning. And so that's not an insignificant amount, particularly because it spans across 94 countries. And what's interesting to me is actually from paper to action. And of the 50 countries that have submitted NAPS to the UNFCCC, we have 44 of them that have actually already accessed GCF funding for programs. And so this is really, really important. And I guess, and it was great to hear Aria's and Johan's comments in terms of lessons learned. For us as practitioners, what we do see is that country ownership is really important, just really crucial. So it's not just about one particular ministry, but how do you bring ministries together to really think about the planning. I think Arya mentioned the stakeholders, and same thing with Jochen in terms of stakeholder engagement. That is just so important to do this, because we are talking about climate financing, and as we all know, it is rife with issues. And so it is really important to bring in stakeholders into this, and particularly for adaptation. And then I guess I would just say, and it's great to see a primarily female panel, considering most of them I feel like some days I'm the token female on the panel. But having a gender responsive NAP is really important, given that it is the most vulnerable, includes women and children. And so I'll end with an example of a NAP program where we just recently approved with GIZ. The program is about $82 million, and I see Antwi, our board member there, so I have to thank our board member who's approved this. But this was approved earlier this year. It's an $82 million program. We contributed $36 million to that, but it was for Laos. And this was part of their NAP and NDC planning. And so 16% of their GDP is forest and agriculture based. And so it is not a small amount of their GDP and their economy. What we did was, actually it's two programs. We had an earlier program that really looked at the barriers to financing, whether that was financial barriers, whether that was investment policy, or legislative barriers. And so that was the first program that we did. Off of the back of that, we actually supported, and this is the second program, where we really focused on forest management at scale. And so that really spanned everything from participatory land use down to community resilience. And that's really where having NAPS, good NAPS planning really helps. That's where we've invested, but this is really key, and I brought it back to it takes a village. If you have a really good NAPS plan, that means that others can come in. That includes private sector. I've got a million great private sector projects that are adaptation based, and having had that background in my previous life, you know, private sector, it's a wall of cash waiting to be invested, but they've got to have good, demonstrated, bankable projects to be there, and that's where NAPS planning comes in.
Thank you very much. And because we are already behind our time, I would actually like the panelists to give this last takeaway from this round. Like just one sentence, please. What's the most important takeaway from our discussion today at this first panel on planning? So we could start here, just to my left. It's maybe the next panel.
the largest takeaway, I need to hand on first.
Well, we're all tired, but let's see what.
Smart move, no problem. Thank you very much, Hong, for highlighting the importance of the NAP for, let's say, generating financial support. Yeah, and indeed, my main takeaway is really that having a sound NAP is so crucial in an institutional setup. Yeah. For all kinds of financiers, especially for the private sector, as you have just outlined, Hong. Thanks for this, spot. Thanks a lot.
I guess from my perspective, it's a little bit of what we talked about, and I think you highlighted this earlier. The less that goes to mitigation means more for adaptation costs. The less in adaptation projects, the more loss and damage there is. So planning, and this is kind of the student 101. You've got to be deliberate. You've got to think through it. That planning really reduces the cost on the back end. Having it being thoughtful, inclusive is so critical.
In full agreement, I guess I would add that overall, the NAPs provide a critical opportunity for scale-up of effective action, for replication of effective action, and they must be inclusive.
Diana, are you ready? Or no? I'll be quick. I would just like to reaffirm my positioning on disaster risk reduction, financial and human risk, as a needed and a key necessary part of NAPS going forward.
And I can be also very short, and I am extremely grateful to also to the organizers to be here, but also to hear from all panelists that there is this agreement that a NAP process really needs to be in collaboration with a number of that it needs to be a joint process, because the NAP is ultimately there to help the vulnerable. So usually people at the national level are not the most vulnerable, so it's really, really important that that's the village approach, and that we are actually thinking about of those who are most in need. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. You have just summarized the key highlights of the first panel. I have to thank you for this, because that's the most difficult task for the moderator, so you just took on the highest burden on my side. Thank you very much. Now, I'm excited to move on to the next topic, moving from planning to implementation. As we have heard at this COP many times, action is needed, and therefore I would like to call on the next international panelist. First, Orville Gray, head of the Secretariat of the NAP Global Network. Welcome. Mr. Antwi, Director of the Climate Vulnerabilities and Adaptation Environmental Protection Agency. Caroline Sack, Senior Head of Strategy and Partnerships at BBC Media Action. And Ashala Abhay Singh, Asia Regional Director and Head of Programs at Global Green Growth Institute. Welcome. So I'm very delighted to move into this next very crucial topic, and I would actually like to start with you, Orville. How can development actors support effective and inclusive implementation of the NAPs?
Thanks very much. Without a doubt, we're not going to be able to implement NAPs without development partners being on board. The governments will require support, and support at all levels. Entities such as our own International Institute for Sustainable Development and the NAP Global Network are among those that are in a very good position to support this process. Our partners here on the platform, we've been working with them with a number of different countries to bring this support home. And from that perspective, we're able to leverage not just the capacity that resides in development institutions, but also the financial capital that is there as well. One of the challenges, especially being here, that we found out in trying to bring support to countries was that many of them recognize that for them, they're happy for the support, but they cannot take the support because they don't have the capacity. And we have to recognize that sometimes we also need to step into the frame to help to provide some of that capacity by maybe going into countries and building the capacity of individuals within the lead agencies, ministries, and organizations at all levels to strengthen that adaptation process in countries to ensure that effective implementation can take place and take place with very good support at all levels, including at the local level.
If you allow me, thank you very much for this very important note. And if you allow me to move a bit faster through this panel, so allowing the audience to also ask questions to make it more lively, I would actually first move on to the next panelist and ask Antwi. Adaptation requires changes in key sectors. And how are you coordinating among and across different stakeholders and different sectors?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think planning, it's context specific, and therefore you need to actually know what you are doing, what you are planning for in the first place. For us as a country, we're looking at vertical and then also horizontal planning. It means the actors are varied and they are different. So you start by actually identifying and mapping out the appropriate stakeholders. So the stakeholders that you engage at the sector level might not be the same as those at the subnational level. So doing the right mapping is the first place. Second place is the fact that you're not just mapping for mapping's sake, but you are mapping for ownership. And so what are the key issues that these sectors are facing in terms of climate risk? So we've just heard a lot about vulnerabilities and risk. Each sector, each local area has its own specific vulnerabilities, and that actually affects the kind of planning or the mapping that you're also doing. And that informs the kind of data that you're looking for, because we say data. What kind of data is relevant for a specific situation and a specific stakeholders? You cannot treat them as equal because they are different. Same as capacity. And so capacity is one of the key things that planning also require, or implementation require. Capacity varied because what you need for maybe the water sector might be different from working with the dry land sector, or even doing smaller community engagement. And so people have to understand all this and to be able to actually do targeted mapping, targeted information, and then targeted assessment so that you can actually get the right results on the ground. I think I will stop here for now. Yeah.
Thank you very much for these insights. Coming to one of my favorite topics, adaptation requires communication and behavior change. And how can communication increase inclusiveness, but at the same time the impact of NEPs?
Thank you. And we've got a big clock here, which is encouraging us to be brief in our comments, so I'll try to be brief. My name's Caroline Sugg. I work with BBC Media Action, which is the BBC's international development arm. And I think by now we can all understand that there's really no doubt that information, communication, and media have a really serious and critical influence on climate action, particularly in this age of mis and disinformation, which sees the manipulation of information and communication by those with vested interests in preventing necessary change. On the positive side, though, we know that there's now lots of evidence of how communication can expand the reach and inclusivity of climate investments, including NAPs, and it was beautiful to hear the really creative example from Aria just now from Grenada. As I say, I work at Media Action, and we're on the ground working in 24 countries with local media and civil society partners, and we're ever more involved in climate communication, communication that's creative as well as strategic. And we've really seen the very concrete impact that this can have. I'll just give one example, but in Indonesia, we've been working with a whole range of local media and civil society partners to create a youth media brand called Aksakita, and it's really worked to engage young people, both within urban areas and indigenous communities, with the issue of adaptation and deforestation. And we know that our audiences were inspired. We reached 35 million people, and a study conducted by the University of Columbia showed that 65% of those changed their behavior and expressed much more support for really ambitious climate policy by the government of Indonesia. So it really felt like a very, very strong result. So there are so many different types of information that need to be communicated, ranging from scientific data to community voice, as we've heard. But as I say, I think we just need to be really clear that taking this issue of communication seriously across the whole NAP planning cycle and in implementation has to be a kind of critical priority going forward. The great news is that the NAP Global Network's been analysing the enabling factors included in NAPs globally, and all of them now produced mention the role of communication and information sharing. But I think we all know we can do more to maximise that, to make it really tailored, to make it broad-reaching, and to make sure that that communication is encouraging inclusion across the piece. There's so many good examples to share, but I'll stop now and we hand over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm actually very happy to move to the next best practice story on how to illustrate how NAPS processes can lead to successful impacts, outcomes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I represent the Global Green Growth Institute, and you saw Professor Diana's presentation where we brought in the gaps and good practice guidance, and that was led by my team who works on climate action and inclusive development at the Global Green Growth Institute. And green growth, at the heart of green growth is the resilience and climate resilience and social inclusive development. So major part of our work is really working with our member and partner countries to really think about how we help our governments to plan, but also most importantly to implement as well. And one of the key activities that we do when we go to our countries is to really look at the green growth opportunities and prepare green growth indexes for our countries. And in that indexes and in opportunities discussion, we really look at the options for adaptation and resilience. And I want to mention here, I think a number of colleagues mentioned the access to finance discussion, and it's great to see GCF also being here. We at GGGI is one of the biggest delivery partners of the readiness program of GCF, Green Climate Fund, and we decided not to be accredited, but actually to support the governments to access funding directly from the GCF as well as the other funding partners. And you saw Professor Diana's presentation where the red box is actually linked to finance, because there is a massive gap when it comes to access to finance, as well as scale and speed in which the countries are accessing finance. So that's one major aspect that we are focusing on, not only from the multilateral funding sources and bilateral funding sources, but also innovative financial sources such as the green bonds, thematic bonds, and we are now also working on debt swaps for nature and climate as well. So I just want to say finally, planning is really good, and we must be planning, because that's what gives the direction of travel for countries in terms of so many years to come. But without a proper implementation plan and proper plan for access to finance, and without thinking at scale and at speed, I think we are really going to be stuck with only with finance. So it's good to have this only with the plan. So it's good to have all this audience here really working in collaboration with our countries to think and support in accessing funding. And we do have many projects that we are supporting countries in accessing finance, as well as implementing national adaptation plans. We just launched the National Adaptation Plan of the UAE. Here at the COP, we are implementing national adaptation plans in a number of other countries, including Sri Lanka, going to all 9 provinces and all thematic sectors that the country wants us to work for, and really thinking about institutional strengthening not just at national level, but also at the provincial level as well. I'm very happy to share experience in detail. If you are interested, please let me know. But because I have a small, limited time, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that was the invitation to the audience, and I want to acknowledge our rich and beautiful audience and pass on the next questions to the audience. So please address, you can address all panelists, not only the ones at stage, but also the first panelist. You can address your questions too. And please shortly introduce yourself.
Yes, no speak English, he speak French.
Do we have somebody who could quickly translate afterwards? Okay, please go ahead, and we have a translator in the audience.
D'accord. C'est un privilège pour moi d'être ici, dans le side event de la GIZ, parce que si je suis ici, à la COP, c'est parce que la GIZ a financé le REGEFAC et nous a accompagnés, c'est eux qui ont permis qu'on arrive à la COP. Donc ça a été un plaisir de rencontrer l'un des personnels de la GIZ ce matin, qui nous a dit qu'il y avait ce side event et qui nous a permis d'être dans la salle pour non seulement déjà remercier, c'est que tous les panélistes parlent du bienfait que la GIZ fait pour accompagner dans le domaine de l'environnement, mais aussi nous, se tenir là maintenant en tant que la sous-région, le REGEFAC, c'est un plaisir et de dire c'est la même pensée que nous voulons, que non seulement nous qui sommes présents ici maintenant, mais l'Afrique, la sous-région a eu seulement, je crois, 3 représentants, mais on souhaite que nous nous retrouvons un peu plus dans le pays africain, mais aussi dans la sous-région, pour que nous puissions donner la voix qu'il faut pour que la jeunesse prenne en main ses responsabilités.
Please bear with the translator, so she has the chance to translate you on this question.
D'accord.
That's okay?
Donc la question ici maintenant, c'est, je n'ai pas vraiment peut-être bien entendu ce qu'ils étaient en train de dire, mais quand je lis déjà par rapport à leur profession, je me dis que l'Afrique aussi a besoin de connaître un peu plus pour savoir ce qu'il faut faire pour l'avenir. Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. He said that it's an honor for him to be here, and he wants to use this opportunity to thank GIZ for inviting him to participate, or also giving him this opportunity to be here. He's calling to have more participants from Africa in order also to increase the capacity, to increase what you're doing, in particular on this area. So I think I make it more short. Thank you. But he's really happy to be here, and really is what he welcomed.
That's an honor. Thank you very much.
Maybe he was also complaining because there is no translation, so he just tried to capture some element.
Next time we will try to make it more inclusive and provide some French translation. Okay, any other questions? I see one here, over here.
Hi everyone, my name is Gaurelo Mkumbeni and I am from South Africa representing the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you for such an incredible panel. I have a question to perhaps the Senior Head of Strategy and Partnerships, Caroline.
And this is about whether you've experienced any barriers in terms of working with communities. Because in my context, I've often seen that local communities, even not just local communities, but in general, society members don't understand adaptation or the importance of adaptation. So in what ways have you been working to counter those barriers? Because I feel often in these spaces, language tends to be super technical and specialized, and not everyone can understand not just the importance of how it is, but how it relates to them as a partner or a stakeholder. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a really important question, and I think this is a key role for communication practitioners in this space, is to bridge the gap between our communities and those speaking in very technical and scientific language, and that process takes time. It means that we need to work with, very much with local civil society partners and bring them together with the scientists in our communities and spend time together in this dialogue and give space to build that understanding. I think it doesn't just come down to the issue of the language that different people use or the concepts people use. It's about respecting the concepts that exist in the local community as well. But also recognizing that sometimes trust has already broken down between communities, between scientific community, between government actors. So having good dialogue and good communication between those groups can be as important in building trust and building that willingness to collaborate together as it can be to understanding scientific concepts. But it's making sure that we're not just jumping to creating some beautiful communication campaign that's telling people what they must do. It's about kind of really genuinely engaging in meaningful dialogue over a longer period of time.
Thank you very much. See.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa Banda from Malawi. So I'm representing Civil Society Network on Climate Change. We're also very keen on the National Adaptation Plan, and ours is still under development. So I wanted to understand, what would effective coordination look like for a country that is developing its NAP? We do have, as a civil society, we do share information that is given by government. We have also worked on developing a country profile where we identified the entry points for the formulation of the NAP, but maybe the coordination might not be there despite us putting in place the stakeholder engagement strategies. So I wanted to understand, what would that look like in our context? Thank you.
Who wants to take up this question?
Okay, so maybe I can. We are also in the process in Ghana, and I'm the coordinator for the NAPs in Ghana. So probably I can share. In fact, effectiveness is relative in any case. It depends on whose effectiveness you are talking about, but there is a baseline, at least to get the basic element on board. For coordination, in fact, NAPS is supposed to be bottom-up in most of the cases. And therefore, you need to make sure that the right institutions, as I said, the stakeholders, for our case in Ghana, we have different layers for coordination. So we have a steering committee that looks critically at all the sectors that the NAPS cover and other institutions that matter in this case. Beneath that one, we have working groups. So we have 5 working groups that are cross-sectoral in nature. So the cross-sectoral means that you have public sector institutions there, you have academia there, you have civil society organizations, you have private sector, and then you also have youth groups, also gender representation. These groups are the ones that do the work by themselves. Because they are on the field, they have the input, and then they have to be. And then beneath this one, you have the community groups where the consultations are done and then bottom up. And so you need to, at all levels, make sure that communication is critical, as she just mentioned. At all levels, you have to make sure that information flow is working. In all levels, you have to make sure that representation is adequate. This is where probably you can reduce to the barest minimum the criticisms that you have from the others. So in any case, you have some kind of, because you can't engage anybody. I've always said that we talk of engagement, deepening our engagement. Deepening engagement means more cost, more time. And we should be ready for that. Because if you want to engage every breadth of the ladder, it means you need more time to do that. It means you have to spend more money to also do that. And we need to actually factor this in our formulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 more panelists to respond on this question with 30 seconds.
Thank you. No, I wanted to respond to this for a couple of things. We, as NAPGN, we're doing quite a bit of work with Malawi, and I think it would be good for you to understand that as well. We're currently working with an NGO on integrating human mobility in the NAP process. So we're trying to ensure that the entry points for civil society participating in that process is open, and we have the support of the government in getting that done. So that's one area where that is done. And beyond that, we've also supported Malawi to prepare a NAP framework that sets out the vision and mandate for the NAP process. And that is driving the process towards development of the NAP that is coming and the interaction at the different levels to bring that information in play. And you know, I just want to flag the support that we're also benefiting from Germany in terms of their support for helping us to move from planning to implementation as we go into 2024 and be able to support countries and be able to build on that rich information in country from the local level, the other subnational levels, as well as the other stakeholders, including the civil society, in strengthening the NAP process for implementation. Thanks.
Thank you. 2 things. Bringing the finance ministry to the discussion. And I know the NAP process normally sits with the Ministry of Environment, Ministries of Environment in our countries, but I think effective coordination require bringing in the Ministries of Finance to the discussion in a coordinated and cohesive manner so they understand the importance of adaptation and particularly bringing in the financing for implementation side. And the second one is the policy alignment and mainstreaming. We have so many planning efforts going on. We have long-term low-emission development strategies. We have nationally determined contributions. We have national adaptation plans. And if they really work in silos and we develop them in silos and don't bring them into one umbrella, I think that coordination is not going to be effective enough. GGGI is working in Ethiopia where we have developed the low emission development strategy of the Ethiopian government, and we brought in the national adaptation plan as well as NDC targets into that whole discussion. So we really have to think much more cohesively to bring in that planning. And for many countries, I say the climate plans has to be the economic plan for our countries. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks for the question. I also wanted to add that very much underlining what was already said by Achala and also the distinguished gentleman from Ghana. What you described is indeed before you are adopting a plan, when you're developing a plan, you go from the local level, you have hearings, and then you go up to the national level and you adopt the NAP. And what we've seen in other research is, comparing countries in Europe, that it's most efficient and most effective if you, in the NAPs then, again, describe very concretely how that can go back down again. So that you, in the NAPs, describe what this means for the regional level, what it means for the district level, and what it means for the local level. Then it's really concrete, and all your other administrative levels are on board. They can really use it more effectively than if this is opaque. So it's kind of a level first up, but then also down again. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this lively discussion here. And I want a big round of applause for all our panelists. And I I was just informed that we have the honor to get some closing remarks, and therefore I would like to invite Madeleine Sarr. She's the head of the Climate Change Division in Senegal's Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, and she's also the first woman to share the LDC group since it began negotiating as a bloc as the UNFCCC negotiations 22 years ago. So I feel very honored and very happy to receive the closing remarks, and hereby I want to thank you to the panelists, to the audience, and let's have the closing remarks by Madeleine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I will not keep you longer. I think thank you for inviting the LDC group in these important side events around NAPS. I was looking to the audience, and we show how important and how critical is NAP. We are LDCs, and NAPS is really a high instrument for LDCs. As we see climate change continue to increase, to intensify, adaptation became critical, and we need really to see how we will adapt in order really to minimize the climate effect on our people, ecosystem, and economy. So why we think as LDC it's really important to develop NAPS. It will allow us to really loan down the cost of loss and damage. I want to really highlight the fact that actually for LDCs, I know that all developing countries are concerned, because I see the coordinator of NAPS from Ghana. It's really a tool that we do believe that all developing countries need this tool. It needs this tool because it's allowed to have all together at the national level in an inclusive approach to ensure that we're taking all needs regarding adaptation and not leaving no one behind in this process at national level. It brings local government, it brings local actor, it brings technician, university, and policy maker all together. It brings also finance actor to build the resilience required in each country. It's a process that needs also communication, and I was really glad to hear about the communication part, because the communication part will allow us really to scale up the good practice coming from the NAPS process measure, and it also will be important for tracking the progress. On behalf of the LDC group, I just want to thank you all, really all, for your support. GIZ, Senegal used to have this opportunity also to be supported by GIZ in order really to develop his, what we call the scientific basic information around NAPS. I will call you to continue do so, because I think we all require that. Actually, we have only 22 LDC who are already having NAPS on the table and submit them, and many LDCs are working on their NAPS. It shows you how this instrument is really a vehicle for having adaptation at the national level. I'm not talking only on national level. I'm talking about the local level, because we're talking to bring it down. And this is the process that we have to have at national level. It's for us really important. It's why in the GGA framework, we're calling for ensuring that all countries will have a NAPS by 2025. I hope it will be possible, and we will make it possible. We're hoping to have all NAPS being implemented by 2030 in order really to build the resilience that these countries, our countries, need in order really to keep our communities' livelihood safe. I want to continue asking you to help us to scale up the finance, to be close to us regarding the establishment of the adaptation framework. I think it's something we need here. And also to help us really to scale up the action on the ground for adaptation. Without no country left behind. I think we all concerned. It's not only developing countries, it's not only LDCs. We are all concerned by adaptation. And NAPS is really a good instrument we have really to use and make it well-known everywhere. Thank you for this opportunity you give to us, and looking to work closely with you in our various countries, in particular for LDC. Thank you for giving me the floor.